Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome to the Low Carb MD and Life's Best Medicine podcast. This is a great guest, so I wanted to have her on both. So we're just going to wrap here, just chit chat and talk about science and life and what matters and what doesn't matter, and lipedema and lymphedema and all this crazy stuff. This is a true scientist we have here. A lot of you know Dave Feldman. This is his trusty sidekick and probably the brains behind the whole thing, and lets Dave just be the front man because he's been doing this a little bit longer. But Siobhan Huggins, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And just to say, Dave does pull his own weight.
Yeah, Dave's an okay guy.
Not only me.
No, I'll tell you, Dave had a huge influence on me. I mean, really, I remember being at a conference. I was like, I think that's Dave Feldman. And this is before a lot of people knew about him. Somehow I knew about him early. And I was like, this guy's kind of going to revolutionize things. And I just remember him sitting there at the conference being so personable and talking to people and looking at their cholesterol and reassuring them and saying, oh, I'm not a doctor, but, you may want to talk to your doctor about a couple of things. And, the research that you're both doing is so important, so groundbreaking. It's a paradigm shift for sure.
Yeah, he snagged me early too. Dave is kind of what got me started on the whole actively researching thing, because I met him at the first keto conference I ever went to, Keto Fest in 2017. And he just sucked me in and got me thinking about a whole bunch of stuff. And it's been a bit of a train without brakes since then.
Yeah, I think once you get your motivation and you have a passion, clearly you have a passion, and you're kind of a unique person, because I think your nature is to be an introvert and not interact with everyone, but you've kind of been thrust into the spotlight, of giving talks and stepping up and stepping out of your comfort zone, and tell people who don't know about your journey.
Yeah, so in August of 2016, I was obese. You might not be able to tell as much at this point. I was 220 pounds. I was very, very, very depressed. A lot of social anxiety, a lot of that stuff. And I had a bunch of other health issues too. My blood work was not fantastic. I had metabolic syndrome. I had chronic joint pain. I didn't know it at the time, but I also had lipedema, and it's this whole thing. And so I had been encouraged by my mom, actually, who had been looking into it, to go on a ketogenic diet instead of calorie restricting for the umpteenth time, which had not worked any of the previous times. But you kind of get into this, maybe if I just do it more, maybe if I lower the calories even more, it'll work this time. And so I had been kind of skeptical at first, but she had kind of said, just look into it, decide I'm going to do it in a couple weeks, so maybe we can do it together. And I had looked into it online, and there did seem to be some scientific evidence behind it. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll try it hardcore, no cheating, super strict for 2 months. And if I see improvement, then I'll continue with it. And if not, pretty much not going to be any worse off. I couldn't imagine being worse off at that point. And at the 2-month mark, I had lost 20 pounds. But the other thing was that my depression that I'd had symptom of since I was 9, and that was full blown at 11, had gone into complete remission. I was like, well, I guess I'm stuck with this now. And I've been doing it ever since. So it's been 5.5 years and change, I think, at this point. And I've kept the weight off. I've lost about 80 pounds. And as long as I stay strict with the diet, then the depression symptoms stay in remission. I've been able to work through the social anxiety a lot more. So for some behind the scenes, every time I do a presentation, my legs and hands are shaking. I'm low-key anxious and trying to hide it the whole time. And then I go into that black void of getting into the zone, and I pop back out and it's like, oh, I'm done.
Yeah, then you have that release. I mean, what's funny. A couple of the speakers in Utah showed me their CGM data, and when they were talking their sugars, it's that stress response. It really is. Or even not even stress, it's just a good stress. Sometimes you have adrenaline because you're excited about what you're talking about. And, all the hard work's putting the talk together and getting the slides and doing it. Then finally, it's like you're finally taking the test and then you can relax. Oh, the test is over. Now we can relax. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And especially if you have anxiety, that makes it even that much more challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, at this point, like the anxiety before was debilitating before keto. And I would have trouble even just interacting with people in the office. I would have a short interaction and then it's like the next several days would be like, well, you said that wrong and you messed that up and they probably hate you now and they think you're an idiot and like all this type of stuff. And now it's like at the end, it's like, well, I didn't get booed off the stage, so I probably did pretty fine and I don't really worry about it that much. The one exception, though, is for one of the Keto Fests in 2019, I had done a talk that I actually really like at this point about insulin resistance and the immune system and how they interplay. And that was a couple of days after I had done a high carb experiment. And for that one, it was like it had been before. Like people were coming up and telling me like, oh, that was really great. I'm glad you talked about that. And in my head, I was just like, nope, they're lying to you. They hated it. They didn't get the whole point, like all of it. And it's one of those situations where it's like, I've really, really, really just got to stick to this because my mental health is the thing that'll really mess me up. And so people will talk about like struggling with cheat days or whatever. I do not have an issue with that because every time it's like, I could have a muffin that honestly doesn't really taste that great anyway, but the consequence of that is going to be depression symptoms, anxiety, not being constructive at work, like all of this type of stuff. And it's like the scales are always tipped towards, I think I'll just go eat some meat instead. Because I really don't want to deal with that.
Well, and I think that's an important thing. That's an advantage sometimes because when you realize, like we've had people with seizure disorder, they go, no, I don't even think it's not even worth it. Like when you start thinking it's definitely not worth it. And a lot of the diabetics say, well, my sugar will go high for a couple of days, then I'll go back and it'll be fine. But when you have a seizure or you get depressed or anxious, it really, really makes it definitely in your best interest not to cheat.
Yeah, and it makes me think actually of something that Kim Howerton had talked about at Keto Salt Lake, where she was talking about instead of focusing on the weight or the inches or whatever, try and focus on what good health gets you. And in my case, it's like good health gets me good mental health as well. And so it's like anytime there's some challenge event or whatever, it's just, okay, why am I doing this again? Oh, it's because I don't want to be depressed and anxious. Well, that makes this easy. And that applies to other people too, even if it's weight loss related or whatever. It's also, well, if I do this, it may lead me down a path of multiple bad things. And I know I can't control myself that well. My willpower is not that strong, or I may have cravings or whatever. And I really want to get older and see my grandkids grow up or be able to go hiking with my wife or whatever it is. So just kind of returning back and focusing on your why is basically the advice I was given, like growing up as a keto baby in the earlier years.
Yeah, I think we lose track of why we're doing this. And at some point it's like drudgery. And like, why am I doing this again? And say, oh yeah, that's right. Because I felt like garbage before and I was depressed and sad and I didn't want to interact with people. And then when you're eating right, you feel better. Then I think there's so much more to it than we even understand, especially in your case, because I know when you did that experiment with a high carb, low fat diet, and it just screwed up your brain for a long time. And I think a lot of people have been doing that, experimenting and failing at it for years and years, and they're depressed and anxious and they don't know there's a way out.
Yeah. And that high carb experiment, it was high carb and high calorie and low fat, like you said, like just all of the things. And the fallout from that in terms of mood, I actually kept track of it. And it took about 2 months to recover from that fully. And even after that, I've had a bunch of issues since then in terms of not being able to tolerate dairy anymore. Like it'll cause weight gain and acne and all this type of stuff. And it was just, what a disaster.
And that wasn't an issue before this.
No, it wasn't an issue before. Like
Wow.
I could eat dairy. I mean, the whole first year of carnivore, I was eating basically pork chops and cream cheese. And I lost weight on that. I got down to one of my lowest weights, and my mood was perfectly fine. I felt fantastic, in fact. And it's only after that high carb experiment that I started having issues. Why? I don't know. Am I mad about it? Very. But it's just one of those things, like with these experiments, you do have to be careful because you just don't know what the consequence is going to be. And the other thing is, when I did that experiment, I did not know that I had lipedema at the time. And so now my low weight is about 10 pounds higher than before that experiment. And I suspect it's because I gained fat in lipedemic areas. And as happens with lipedema, it scarred over. And now it's very difficult to get rid of.
Yeah, for people who don't know what lipedema is, can you give them a nutshell of what that is?
Yeah, so lipedema is basically defined by, I think Catherine has said maldistribution of fat. Basically, it's disproportionate. And typically it shows up on the lower body, and there can be a couple different patterns, and then also the arms in some people. So I have it hip to ankle, and then shoulder to wrist, which is the majority of my body, and also some in my lower abdomen as well. And so it causes this fat gain in those areas. And then, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, this fat will scar over and become fibrotic, and it causes nodules, which is basically just little lumps of this scarred over fat. And that's one of the distinctive things, is if you feel this lipedema fat, in a lot of cases, it can feel grainy, or like it has little bumps or bubbles in it. And so at conferences now, I'll go up to people and be like, feel this. Do you feel this in any of your patients? Do you feel this in yourself? Like, this might be what it is, type of thing.
Well, and I have to thank you for that, because I've had patients that, now that you say, here, feel this, this is what it is. And now that I have an understanding, I was like, oh, now I know people had lipedema, but were missing it. We just thought it was that you gained weight, right? But there's some of the defining things that people should know is that a lot of times it's very tender. So they'll say, gosh, it hurts my leg. If the dog jumps on it, it hurts like crazy. But if the dog jumps on their abdomen, it doesn't hurt at all. You know, it's a different sensation also.
Yeah, I've had people grab my arm, or I've bumped my thigh into things or whatever, and I would react really strongly, especially before keto. It's gotten a lot better now. And people would tell me I was exaggerating. And it's like, I am not exaggerating. That is excruciatingly painful. Like, even if they're just grabbing my arm gently to get my attention. And I had no idea why. And even during like my diagnosis appointment, the diagnosing physician would grab my fat and like squeeze it and be like, how does that feel? And it's like, well, it hurts, obviously. Doesn't it hurt for everyone? It's like, well, no, actually. And one of the other things that shows up is very easy bruising, especially in the legs. And it's another thing where it's just like, well, of course I bruise. Doesn't everybody? It's part of the human condition. And it's like, okay, yeah, but you're bruising really, really easily. And it's also location specific. So you might bruise all the time in your legs, but not really in your arms or your abdomen or wherever else. So it's one of those things. So you've got the excess fat accumulation that's disproportionate. And then you've also got trouble losing it. And these also side things that can pop up, like the pain and the easy bruising and all that type of stuff. And there's also really interesting things of like leg aches, which I found that compression really helps with, and swelling in the legs. And yeah, so not very fun. But the good news is I only got diagnosed early last year, almost exactly a year ago, a little bit over. And I was filling out the intake survey for this diagnosis appointment. And it was asking a bunch of these questions of like, do you experience pain? Do you have leg aches and stuff like that? And for a lot of it, I would have to reply, well, no, not right now. But before keto, I did, or before keto, it was much worse. And so even just with me personally, I've had this experience of a whole bunch of my lipedema symptoms improve dramatically, even before I knew what it was. And the other good news for me, as far as I can tell, except for the high carb experiment, I haven't seen any progression since I've gone keto. So it's like, okay, well, cool. So if I just stick with this, maybe I can at least slow progression, or even just halt it entirely for the foreseeable future, which would be nice, because if it goes on long enough and progresses enough, it can be very debilitating, not just in terms of the pain and things like that, but also in terms of mobility. So I would like to avoid that if possible.
Yeah, and I think catching it early is the key. If we make the diagnosis and we say, okay, and we're seeing tons of data on the ketogenic diet helping this condition in particular. So I think there's a lot that we can learn. I think we all pick each other's brains and try to figure out why is it that like you would respond better to a higher fat ketogenic diet than a more protein based, and it's an individual variability. And I think it's a lot of trial and error and experimentation, seeing what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing is we're still learning about it, and there's a lot of active learning going on. So if you just look at the research that's published over the last year, it's like an insane amount, which is a good thing. And the other aspect is like there's some people who do fine with low carb, some with keto, some with carnivore, some with high fat carnivore, and we don't know why, I don't think, at least not for why some people need certain variants of the diet to really succeed and feel their best. But it doesn't matter at this point, because if we know things that can help, we can just lay them out for people and say, here's a couple different things that you can try. And whichever one you feel best with and your health is the best using, just do that one. And we'll learn about why it works as we go along. But for right now, I think, I don't remember who said it, but like keto is one of the most well-studied diets at this point. So if we've identified a condition that it helps with, we can at least say, go ahead. Work with your doctor, obviously, and keep an eye on your health, but like we might be pretty good at this point, at least to continue it as management, especially when there's such severe consequences for it being poorly managed in terms of quality of life and progression and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I think we're learning a lot. My biggest surprise, as I said from the beginning, was the mental health. Like you make a big point of that, as the mental health, the anxiety, the social phobia, things like that get better. It seems to get better. And then if people are stress eaters or depression eaters, then they don't need the food as much. So it's kind of a big picture. You have to step back and say, okay, how do we address these things that you're not sleeping, you're stressed, you're worried all the time, and food's your comfort. How do we fix that problem? And I think you've done a great job of sharing with people, say, yeah, I struggle with depression, right? And that this is a treatment for depression instead of taking a bunch of drugs and being miserable all the time. Sometimes you could say, gosh, maybe I change my lifestyle and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely some things that were not diet related. There were some things that even after keto, just like a year or two ago, I ended up going to trauma counseling for. Like, I'm not ashamed to say that. Diet has helped a lot. Some things I needed to work through on my own, like a lot of the social anxiety, I think, was patterns that I had built up in my thinking, and I needed to work on undoing those. And that really started at Keto Fest, and I used Dave as practice because he's like the least anxiety inducing person to interact with ever. And some things I did need additional help with, like the trauma counseling. And it's not like we're saying keto cures everything, and if you do keto, then you don't need therapy or counseling or anything else. It's like, no, but it can be very helpful for some people, especially like given how much diet affects my mood, I have to wonder if it's metabolically related. And there is some stuff talking about how inflammatory signaling in the brain can impact dopamine regulation and all this type of stuff. So I wouldn't doubt it. And one thing I'm noticing recently is if I'm not really, really strict in terms of avoiding spices and being careful which restaurant I'm eating at, the social anxiety can become present again. Not as much as it was before, but it'll be like, I'll be second guessing interactions with people. And it's like, wait, when you have depression for a long time, you get into this habit of analyzing your interactions of like, okay, this happened and my reaction was this a legitimate reaction? Was this overblown? Because it's not right and your reactions aren't right, but you can't talk yourself out of it, but you still end up going over it a bunch anyway. And so now it's just a habit for me of when I start feeling down or when I start feeling anxious, it's like, okay, what happened? Is this actually coming from a reasonable place, or is something else going on? Like, have you not had enough sleep?
You're tuned into it. Yeah, not a sleep, or you're on your period, whatever.
And
all those kind of things.
usually the first question I have is, what have I been eating? So when I travel to conferences, I'll often eat at restaurants because it's what everybody does. And I was paying attention to this at Keto Salt Lake. And some of those restaurants that I ate at, like the evening after, I would start feeling anxious again. It's like, okay, wait. So then after that, I stopped doing that and being a lot more careful. And it's like, oh, I feel really fantastic. And like my interactions with people are all great. And I'm not worried about like what they think of me or anything like that. Maybe it's not that I get anxious at conferences because of the conference. It's because of what I eat when I'm traveling. And so now at least I know to be a lot more careful, because I want to have fun at conferences. I want to interact with other people in the community and like, sure, take a big nap afterwards because it's mentally exhausting, but in a good way. And I want to be able to take advantage of that. Like I only get to go to conferences a few times a year. So I really want to be feeling my best. And it sounds ridiculous and like I'm just making stuff up, like how can spices impact your mood, whatever. But I don't know how, but it happens and I can replicate it over and over and over again. And I can look back on things and say, oh, this lines up again and again. And so I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's an important, I mean, that's what my job is to observe. And I see stuff and I remember thinking, why are the carnivores happier than everyone else? Why are they easier to get along with? Why is it? And I didn't know why. Is it something they're not getting anymore that's toxic, or is it that they're putting some kind of nutrient in that's necessary for brain function? And so I started really observing that and saying, gosh, it is. And I think, I mean, despite what some people may think, I think the gut microbiome is going to play a role in the communication and all this. There's enough data and there's enough anecdotal data. And you know, crazy enough, we just interviewed Dr. Yoga Nathan, and he was talking about people when they do a fecal transplant, like the person who gets is the recipient, say they're morbidly obese or they have Crohn's disease or something, and they get a fecal transplant, the donor, they interview them before and after and everything, and so the recipient starts craving the same things the donor craves. They never craved that before. Now all of a sudden they have these new cravings. They want kimchi instead of donuts now, and they go, that's weird. I don't know why, but I just don't crave what I used to anymore. So it's really, really interesting science. And I wonder how much of an effect that had when you went on the low carb. If you fed the bad bacteria and they start sending off messages to your brain, here, you're a bad person, or, you know, and this inflammation part of it, because we know there's a crosstalk between all this stuff. So anyways, it's very intriguing. I think we're going to learn a lot over the next few years of how diet really impacts the whole body and the brain.
Yeah. And funny you mentioned about the gut bacteria. When I had done the initial high fat carnivore experiment and then the high carb experiment after, I had gotten microbiome testing at each end. And man, oh man, remind me to send it to you sometime, because after the high carb, it's like with the high fat, it's like, oh, you have like 10 unique species and everything looks great and it's 98th percentile and you look like what we think a healthy person should look like. And then after the high carb, it's like everything's dead. It's just desolate. Everything, the amounts of everything is dropped. All my unique species are gone.
It's incredible. And people don't realize that with all the processed food and all the junk we're eating. And so, yeah, and your gut microbiome will change based on what you're eating. And then you're going to get different signals to your brain about satiety and hunger and all these kind of things. So yeah, and mood and stress levels, all that. And it's just remarkable. I've been really stunned by how depression and anxiety affect the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome affects I mean, it's incredible, this circle. And you start thinking, what's the cause and but all of it says, even again, we go back, watch your stress, get enough sleep, eat real food, and all of it, no matter what the cause necessarily is, the treatment seems to be the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like one thing I want to emphasize here is like, even though I'm saying like I seem to have an issue with spices and dairy, like I'm not saying everyone is going to have this issue, or even that everyone will have issues with carbs. Like we have plenty of examples of indigenous populations on traditional diets, eating higher carb diets, even very high carb diets, and they appear to be perfectly fine. But it's like once you enter into this realm of Western diets and the aftermath of that and the effects on metabolic health and energy handling and all this type of stuff, it just changes the landscape in such a way that you may not be able to handle those types of diets anymore, at least not while you're in that same state. And there's actually a really, really interesting study where they were looking at obese, metabolically unhealthy people versus lean and healthy people in different macro compositions. And they weren't even like low carb, but it was like 50% protein versus 50% carb versus 50% fat. And the metabolically unhealthy group was having enormous responses in insulin to the high carb diet, but the lean healthy people, they're pretty much the same across all diets. It's like, well, no wonder we're seeing like these people in these traditional settings handle this perfectly fine, but then in the US and these other countries where our metabolic health has just been wrecked through whatever mechanism, I don't think we fully understand yet, but you just start having these different responses in postprandial insulin, so insulin after a meal, and even the inflammatory responses after each meal was different in the metabolically unhealthy group versus the metabolically healthy group were just chill and fine the whole time. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's a component of not only like why some people have issue with carbs, but as Gary Taubes has talked about, why some people don't do well with carbs or like all this type of stuff. It may be because of the metabolic health context that's happening. And so it's like, okay, here's why this may be really useful as a therapeutic diet, because you're not getting that massive insulin spike. You're not getting the massive inflammatory response. And like this applies to stuff like depression and lipedema and all this other stuff. Maybe you're just kind of mitigating some of that negative metabolic and inflammatory consequence. And it's like, okay, maybe we're a little bit teeny tiny bit closer to understanding. Like there's still a ton to learn, but I think like over the years, especially, we're just learning more and more and more. And yeah, I'm a little bit obsessed with trying to understand things, and I don't care what it is. It's funny because I have a presentation for the April Symposium for the Ketogenic Revolution for Lipedema and Lymphedema Symposium that I'm also a co-director of and like juggling 20 things at once. But I'm doing this presentation on what may be contributing to fibrosis, so that scarring of the fat tissue in both lipedema and lymphedema. And because I was looking into that and putting this presentation together, I started reading more about lymphedema, and I was like, wait, this is also really interesting. So now I want to do a presentation on that one next. And
you've done a lot. I mean, you were the first one I ever heard talking about. Do you know LDL plays a role in immune function? LDL cholesterol that we see is the bad cholesterol. It's like, oh, it does, right? And you see there's data out there showing a lot of this stuff. So you go, okay, maybe we need some of that to be around to help us with some things.
Yeah, and like, I don't know that we have enough information to say what level of a role it plays like out in the wild, or what level is needed for that function to happen or whatever, but it's just fascinating to me, especially in terms of like, I grew up being really afraid of my body and feeling like it's working against me and it's trying to kill you and it'll punish you in every single way possible. And then I started looking into all this stuff, and it's like, no, wait. A lot of this stuff that we're seeing may actually be the body trying to keep us alive. Like, even if it may lead to obesity and lead to all of these other diseases, maybe that's actually better than the alternative, which is just being dead. So
there's zero question in my mind. The more the body does not want to kill you. Your body wants, everyone listening, your body wants to make you survive as long as possible. There's a vested interest your body has, right? Your heart wants to live as long as it can, which is interesting. We get fat because you can't let all that energy sit in your bloodstream because it's toxic and it causes problems. So it's going to make you fat. So you're not fat because your body's trying to make you fat and ruin your life. It's saying, hey, you're not helping out this situation, or I got to store this stuff in a different area. And so all these things you see, we've just outstripped all of our coping mechanisms, right? So it's really a fascinating thing, is if we get out of the way and we stop putting toxins in, we could just do that much better.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like the obesity thing is like, if you look at people who are obese, it's like their appetite is dysregulated. Their postprandial insulin and even fasting insulin is all over the place, which is going to impact fat storage. Like, we know that much, at least. You can argue over what's causing the high insulin. I have my thoughts. Gary Taubes has his thoughts, all that type of stuff, whatever. But it's going to have an impact. And the other thing is, like, in people who are obese, we also see differences in glucose handling and insulin resistance within the muscle, and how the muscle handles fat, and how well they can use fat in general in that type of state. So it's like, this is not just a process of, oh, you're lazy and you're gluttonous and you like food too much. Like, first of all, you're supposed to enjoy food. Food is meant to be pleasurable. I ask anyone listening to this to go out to a farm, look at the chickens, look at the sheep, look at all of the animals anywhere. Do they look like they are miserable and being like, oh no, I can't eat that, that's hyper palatable? No, like, they'll find a patch of clover and the sheep's tail will wag because they're like, oh, this is my favorite. And chickens will lose their absolute mind when they find a mice and they're just so overjoyed and excited about it. Like, that's normal. I don't think it's related to any of that stuff. I think there's stuff that can disrupt your appetite. There's stuff that can disrupt energy storage. There's stuff that can disrupt immune responses in the body. And like, if we can address that stuff, that is the ideal, in my opinion, because it's addressing the actual root cause instead of trying to play this like pin the tail on the donkey blame game. And like, oh no, it's the inflammation. Oh no, it's blah, blah, blah. Well, why don't we address what's causing the inflammation, at least to the best as we can? We definitely don't understand everything, like, not even close, but we can say, hey, here's something that reduces inflammation levels in the body. So probably reduces the need for inflammation to be going on all the time. This is something that reduces insulin levels. This is something that regulates appetite. This is something that induces weight loss, helps with all these diseases. That's at least a place to start, in my opinion. I mean, I'm opinionated, but
well, and you gave a talk on, look, not all inflammation is bad, right? You look and say, why is the inflammation there in the first place? Because you have injury and you're trying to help yourself. And looking at stress isn't a bad thing, and acute stress is not a big deal. Your body reacts. You need that sympathetic tone. But if you're chronically stressed all the time, it's going to be totally destructive. Just like you need a certain amount of insulin. If you have too much, it's a problem. You have too little, it's a problem. And our body wants to be in this sweet spot, right, of hormones and everything.
Yeah, and when different situations come up, that's going to shift. So when we get sick, our glucose tolerance shifts. There's a really fascinating paper where they're looking at people who had these 3rd-degree burns, and they followed them for a while, and they noticed that after the injury, their glucose tolerance was impaired. It's like not related to what they're eating, because it persisted for several years until they healed from those burns, that tremendous horrific injury, and then done, back to normal. So it's like, this is all integrated into stuff that is helpful for our survival, but at the same time acknowledging that if this is going on for years, decades, lifetimes, then yeah, it's going to have negative consequences. It could lead to, dying at a younger age, all this stuff. But the thing to focus on is like, okay, what situation required all of this stuff all the time, and how do we not do that? And I don't care if it's keto or low carb or paleo or whatever, even better if we can figure out what the initial triggers are in the first place, and then just not just no. And the thing that I'm concerned about a little bit, and this is an unpopular opinion, is because we have evidence of these high carb societies doing okay. And people are focusing a lot on the carbs and saying, oh, it's the carbs that cause the problem. But because we have that, it's like, well, I don't know, like there's contradictions to that. And what I'm concerned about is like people using keto and all this type of stuff as a problem solver, which is not a problem, but misidentifying what the cause of the issue is. And then 20, 30 years down the road, we end up in the same situation because we haven't actually figured out how we got into this place in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a key.
I'm such a nitpicker. And actually, but all the time, because it's like, I don't want us to land in that situation, because it's going to land us in a lot more suffering that may be completely unnecessary if we're just careful about where we're saying the issue is. And I think it's okay to say, like, we don't know right now. We know we have some ideas. We have a lot of ideas, but we don't have it pinned down, and we should keep looking until we're absolutely sure, because we do not want this to get worse, and we don't want it to happen again, because how disheartening would that be?
That is a good point. I think that's something we lose track of. And for me, being a doctor all these years before I got all my gray hairs and all this stuff, but I still think, well, anyone who's diabetic is because they're not listening with the advice we're giving them, right? No one's listening. They're not doing what we're telling them, but we're giving bad advice. Like the guidelines were terrible. So then you start saying, well, if someone does a keto diet, then they should lose weight, right? There's people who can gain weight on a keto diet that will put muscle mass on and get bigger. There's some people who won't lose any weight where it's not helping them. And there's some people who are going to gain weight because they're going to have bread and butter. And I mean, not bread, I'm sorry, butter and cream cheese. And they're having 14,000 calories a day of all this other keto stuff. And it says keto on the package, right? So there's ways we have to say what else is going on. Plus we have to assess stress, exercise level, sleep, are you a jerk to everyone in the world? All these things play a role. And so you could do, out of these 5 things, you do 2 of them and say, how come it's not working? Well, you got 3 more to work on, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is sometimes it can be complicated. Like, it's very rare, but I have seen maybe 3 or 4 cases of it now where people are doing keto, have tried carnivore, have been extremely careful, and they're still diabetic. They're not losing weight. They're still ravenously hungry. They're still having obsessive thoughts about food. And the response they get is like, oh, you're not doing it right. Oh, you're not listening. Oh, you're cheating and not telling anyone. And my suggestion is maybe consider believing them and then asking, well, that's really interesting. I wonder what's going on here. And then encouraging them to try additional things like maybe high fat carnivore, maybe limiting the spices, maybe getting rid of dairy, whatever it is, adding exercise, adding physical activity, stress management, sleep, all this type of stuff, and try and see what actually helps them instead of just dismissing them out of hand, because we don't know everything. It is very possible that they are telling you the truth and just saying, oh no, that can't possibly be because keto fixes everything. Well, that's not helping them. And sure, you could say
and it's
other
frustrating.
outliers.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating for them. It's heartbreaking for them because, you want to find some place where people are really believing you and supporting you when you say you have an issue. And in general, the keto and low carb community is really good with that. But in some cases, there can be confusing, frustrating situations where it's like, you just want it to work so that you can stop thinking about it. But at the same time, it's like, try and think about it from their perspective, give them a little bit of trust and just ask, like, even if you don't know, just saying like, I don't know why, but I believe you and I believe you're going to figure it out, and just keep trying. It's the only thing you can do in some cases, but hopefully they'll figure it out and then report back, and that may help someone else.
Yeah, no, I've had people tweak one thing and they say, oh, once I started changing my exercise, look, I'm doing better. And so I think it's all those things, and just not giving up one step at a time and saying, okay, it's not great right now, but let me stick with it and not change too quickly too. Because some people, I've been doing this for 3 days and I didn't lose all my weight. Well, it took you 20 years to gain the weight, or it's going to take a little bit longer than 3 days to lose it all, right?
Yeah, like when I first went high fat carnivore, I didn't lose any weight until about 9 days in. And I know other people who've started keto and they lost the initial water weight, stalled out for 3 months before losing anything else. It's like, it's not always going to be super fast. There may be healing that needs to go on. There may be metabolic changes that need to go on. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't fully understand. But hopefully if we listen to people and, like, sure, if you're their doctor, have them log their food for a while, because maybe there's leaks and they're just not aware or whatever it is. Stick a CGM on them and ask, like, oh, what's this spike here? And see, like, maybe it was stress, maybe it was something they were eating, maybe it's like they had a spice mix and it had a bunch of cornstarch in it and they didn't know. But exactly, I think approaching from a place of empathy and curiosity, and I mean, a lot of people have already been through a lot by the time they're asking for help, and just understanding that and trying to lend some additional support, even if it's confusing or frustrating for you to see them struggle. Like, that's what I try to focus on, at least.
Yeah, I think as we look at the psychological part, the emotional part of it, the physiologic part, we have to break it down and start trying to figure out the problem and say, okay, there's something going on here. Let's try to figure it out. Because I know you could just be worried about losing weight. I mean, there's some of the data. There was a study Dr. Crum did looking at, the mindset and how much of a role that plays. If you think people are, there are studies showing that, surgeons will ask people, hey, do you think this knee replacement is going to help you? No, I don't think it's going to help you. I don't think it's going to help me. cancel the surgery. It's not going to help you. You're going to have trouble. And it's amazing, just that mindset of, you think that if you don't trust your doctor, you don't trust your nutritionist, and just that, not trusting the advice, you could do worse. Or even if I force you to exercise and you hate every second of it, you don't have as good of a response if you go, I feel like exercising today, I'm going to go for a walk, and just enjoying the journey rather than just the outcome of that, what you're doing.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, with the exercise thing, people will say that it will always help or whatever, and it's like, but what if someone doesn't want to exercise, they dread the thought of exercising, and there's a reason for that? They could have hypothyroidism and not know it. They could be not eating enough and their metabolism is downregulating. They could be not getting enough sleep, and that's why they're tired and fatigued and not up for the extra activity. Like, I've experienced that myself. When my diet is not on point, I don't want to go on a hike. I'm tired. I want to go back to bed. But when my diet is really on point, it's like, oh, it's Saturday, it's Sunday, I'm going on a hike up into the mountains. So I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to bring a book and read it at the top of the mountain while overlooking Boulder and like all this stuff. So I think just like listening to people and then being like, well, why? Is it because you're tired all the time that you don't want to exercise? Or is it just because it's new and you're not really sure how to approach it, or it's really overwhelming? And the same goes for diet change as well. Like, some people are not mentally ready, or they just don't know how to approach it, don't know what the right thing to do, or they have been in this situation where they've tried diets over and over and over and over again, and they have had their heart broken over and over and over and over again. And so the idea of taking on this new one, that even though you're telling them it's going to work, like they've been told 15 times before with a bunch of other diets, they're scared. And so they may need additional support of, okay, well, let's try this slowly, or here's some things we can look out for that'll let you know it's working. And just all this different type of stuff that can lend a little bit of extra support, and asking them why they're struggling. Are they worried about peer pressure? Are they worried about family reaction? Are they worried about cultural food traditions? Like, okay, let's work with that.
Yeah, and believing in yourself and believing you can do this too. And a lot of people go, I'm just going to blow it. Like, one of my favorite patients, she's crushed it. She's been doing great, unbelievable results actually. But the first weekend she was struggling. She was eating Tootsie Rolls and all this kind of stuff. And then I said, what's going on? What's the emotion about? Because she started crying, and I started, are you like scared because you don't think you'll lose weight? She said, no, I know I'll lose weight, but I'm going to gain it back. That's what I'm concerned about, because I've felt so great, and every time I gain it all back. And now it's been a year and a half, 2 years, and she's kept it up and she's doing great. But it's that mindset of, I know I'm going to screw it up again, because they've been through all these different programs where they make you feel like a failure because you blew it, right? Because you never learn the right tools to keep you that way. Even if it takes longer to lose it, you want to keep it off. You don't want to lose it really fast and get it back twice as fast.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that frustrates me so much that I stutter, is people who are like, oh, all these people who are obese and sick and diabetic just don't want to change. It's like, if you have ever been obese or sick or depressed, you pray for something that will help you. But at the same time, there's this complex interplay of things you've previously tried, and being depressed in the first place, and being pessimistic, and feeling like you are broken and nothing you do will ever change that. And that deserves sympathy, in my opinion, not just like making fun of them and being like, oh, they just want the easy way out, they just want shortcuts, whatever. I don't actually think that's true in like 99% of people. A lot of the people I talk to who it's like, oh, there may be something that can actually help, like VertaHealth, all the stuff they're doing has shown that this can be reversed, not just managed, they'll jump on it. If there's data to support it, they will jump on it. That's what got me started on keto as well. There was data to support it. And now we're getting more and more of that coming out with more and more stuff. And I think the landscape is going to change, where people realize that this may be a really effective tool for them that may actually help get them to where they want to be and have always wanted to be. Because being unhealthy and not feeling good, no one wants that. No one. I don't know of anyone who wants that.
Well, and the hard thing is, like what you're saying is, you start out obese, right? Depressed, poor self-esteem, all those things. And when you have that, it's hard to say, okay, nothing really matters. It's hard when you're depressed. It's like when someone's paranoid and I say, okay, trust me. I'm like, they're paranoid. They're not going to trust anything I say because they're paranoid in the first place. So I'll say, you're stressed. Okay. I don't want to tell you that stress is really bad for you, but it is. So what do we do to mitigate some of this? What are things you can do? Can we not take care of the grandkids every day of the week and you're stressed, you don't have enough time? All these things that I've seen, like we make little tweaks somewhere and say, have some boundaries at some point. If Dave makes you work 7 days a week and you never see your family, at some point you go, hey, Dave, I got to like take a couple of days off and, spend time. And so I'm
Dave,
joking because he's the nicest guy on earth. I'm joking, but
Dave and I actually have a really excellent working relationship. And one of the things he said really early on is we're going to establish boundaries of you don't work on weekends unless there's like something is burning down and we really both need to work on it, and try and set like actual work hours, which is something I've struggled with a lot because the work never ends, especially when you're self-employed and doing contracting stuff and all this other stuff. I was like, no, we're going to work 9 to 5. And after that clock hits 5, you're done. Not always doing it, but, striving for perfection, knowing you're not always going to get there. And so when I've started volunteering for the Lipedema project, which I'm now technically on the board of directors of at this point, because I needed more things to do. I told Catherine, like straight up, I do not work on weekends. Like I have seen what happens when I do, and I get too stressed out and I get fatigued and I get burnt out, and it's just not sustainable. So I cannot help on weekends, at least the majority of the time. I'll make exceptions if I really need to, but I cannot do it. I need to go hiking. I need to walk up to the store. I need to get my 5 miles in a day, whatever it is, to just burn off the stress and relax. And sometimes, like when I've got presentations coming up, that's relaxed a little bit, or I won't finish in time, but always with the knowledge that like, okay, after we're done with this, we're going back to no working on weekends because I need it for my mental health and for my physical health as well. And just to do the best that I can and whatever it is I'm doing.
Hey everyone, I hope you're listening to this. This is Life's Best Medicine. This is what I had to figure to. It took me a lot more years to really realize that, but I was working every weekend. I was working till late at night. I wasn't seeing my family. I wasn't seeing friends. And so I realized, like, even now, I was just thinking it's Friday afternoon. Thanks for joining me on a Friday afternoon. But it's like, I remember like all weekend I'd be working. I go, okay, how do I juggle all this stuff? And this weekend I was thinking, I don't really have anything going. I'm going to go hang out with my wife tomorrow. I got things going. And I would feel so guilty if I wasn't working on the weekend because I knew I was going to pay for it the next week. And I knew that there was so much I had to do, but changing that and saying, okay, it's not worth it anymore. It's not worth it for me to work 14, 16 hours. Maybe I make a little more money, but it's not worth it. The trade-off just isn't worth it. So having those boundaries going in, saying, look, I'll do it, but based on these are things I will and won't do. And I think that's a really healthy way to handle life, especially when you have a history of depression and anxiety.
Yeah, you can be a little bit of a perfectionist and an overworker with the anxiety thing and like being a people pleaser and all this type of stuff. But it helps to have a good work team of people who are like, yeah, I encourage, tell me no, tell me I can't do that. Tell me I have too much on my plate already. And if it gets to the point like where both of us have too much work to do or the whole team has too much work to do, we'll hire someone else if we can. Find someone else to do the work, delegate some of the work to each other, whatever, until we have it sorted out. Because burning out, like you can feel yourself approaching burnout. And it's like, if you don't address it right now, this is going to be a several month long recovery process. And you're not going to get much of anything done over that time because you're going to be so exhausted and so unmotivated, so unexcited about things. It's like, just address it early or you will pay for it. You have to pay for it either way. And it's going to be a higher cost if you put it off.
And if you put off sleep, you put off exercise, you put off being nice to people, all those things that we put off for years and years. You go, okay, I'm going to work hard this year. And then next year I'm going to relax. And next year you work twice as hard.
Next year never comes. Tomorrow never comes.
And especially people like you and Dave, because you have so many things you want to accomplish and you're motivated and you're driven. It's something you have a passion about. Like so many people hate their job and they're still doing it because they're like, my boss is going to get mad at me if I don't do this stuff. And, but when you have a passion, it's like for someone, as a matter of fact, when I was at Salt Lake, Keto Salt Lake, someone asked me, Brian, would you ever think about retiring? I was like, it doesn't even cross my mind at all. It's not even, I love what I do. I don't want to retire. I mean, I really don't have a desire. I love to yeah, I don't know what I would do, but
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about the same stuff. Like, I know I'm nowhere at that point now, but it's like, why would I want to? What would I do with my time? I would like, there's so many things left to learn. I can't imagine being like 65 and being like, okay, I'm done learning now. Seriously doubt it. Maybe I'll be tired of it by then, but I don't see it happening.
yeah, but at my old practice, I thought about one day I'm gonna walk out and I'm gonna hand this over and say, good luck, I'm done. Right. And I was done. I was really, if I had to stay there, I would be done. I wouldn't practice medicine probably anymore. It was too much of a toll on my life and my body and my brain. So you start realizing, and as a matter of fact, my wife was teasing me. She said, you still have kind of PTSD from that. Like, I'm so every day I come to my office, I'm appreciative. I love my office manager, my staff. There's no conflict ever. Everyone gets along. I'm like, this is like not work for me when we're, it's like being at a spa or something. I'm relaxed and I'm chill and I get to talk to people like you all day long, and it's great. And so, and I'm helping people and I see the benefit if we're working, and you never see the fruit of your labor. It's really terrible. Or if all your patients are sick and you're seeing amputations and all that, it's just terrible. You don't want to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, it's another pet peeve on a long list of mine. If people are like, "Oh, doctors are all jerks. They don't care. All they care about is money."
For the most part.
But it's like, have you ever talked to one? Like, the thing is, if you go into this line of work because you want to help people, and then what you're taught isn't helping people, and you're seeing people get worse over and over again, and these are patients that you care about, deeply care about. Like, imagine that situation over years and years and years of having a practice. You're going to get jaded and you're going to build up calluses because you need to, because it's devastating otherwise. So yeah, no wonder there's a huge problem of doctor burnout. No wonder some doctors can be abrasive and distant and come off cold, because that appears to me to be a defense mechanism against having to deal with a very poor work environment. And like, look at the low carb doctors. Where are the jerks there? I'm sure they exist, but for the most part, it's everybody talking about how happy they are, how much they love their patients, how much they look forward to seeing and hugging and celebrating victories with their patients. And it's because they feel like they matter to these people and in their work. Like, if you're stuck in this job environment of feeling like nothing I do matters, even if I don't come into work, nothing's going to change, no one's going to be impacted by it. Like, of course you're going to get kind of grumpy about it.
I'll tell Mark Cucuzella, we were sitting next to each other at the conference, and he gets a text. He's looking and says, "Hey, Brian," whispers to me, "Brian, look at this guy." He goes, "This guy used to be 150 pounds heavier. He's telling me this story." He goes, "Look at him now. He's out with a hike with his kids. He's thanking me." And he gets another one and he goes, "This is why we do this." And you realize, like, you're helping people, you're doing good stuff. And I think when everyone's getting sick, and it's not just us, I talk to police officers too. They say, I risk my life. I get shot at. I take down a gang member who shot 3 people. And 3 days later, I see him back on the streets again after I arrest him. And you think, what the heck am I doing? What am I doing? And so a lot of people are seeing that, but the firemen that can't rescue people and they go through all this trauma all the time. They say, gosh, I'm just not making a difference anymore. And teachers, and when the kids don't listen, and pastors, when no one listens at church and everyone's falling asleep or whatever, you start realizing people burn out because they're not making a difference. And that's what I love. I love teasing Dave when I see him and he's taking a picture of his hand and, with his food, and but this guy is documenting everything and he's serious about what he's doing. And both of you, I see this integrity of saying, okay, look, if I find an answer you guys don't like, I'm still going to give you that answer. That's what the answer is. And I'm not going to change it to make this group like me,
Yeah, we're kind of jerks that way, but I think it's a necessary thing. And it does come from passion and compassion and all this different stuff. And if you don't have that, if you can't be excited about going into work, maybe take a break, but also consider what you're doing. And if there's a way that you can change that, like, what is the issue behind why you're being a jerk to everyone all the time? And yeah.
Look, you're young and you got all this good insight. That's awesome, right?
Because
that's awesome.
I hang out with very good people who also have good insights.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think who you surround yourself, like Dave surrounds himself with good people. When like having a team like you are, and you're passionate. Go, what do you think about this? Let's look at this. Listen, what do you think about that? We don't have an answer for this yet. And having that wisdom, and I think that's really, in the bottom line. I think in medicine, I've seen a lot of doctors, they've just lost their curiosity. They just go, this is what I've been told. I'm just doing this. It's not working, but I'm going to keep doing it because that's what they told me 20 years ago was going to work. And then they're just not seeing the results. So, and I think when you're seeing results and, you know, bringing up the energy model of cholesterol and understanding it, and I could see it in my patients and predict what's going to happen because of the work that you've done. Because I can say, okay, here's what's probably going to happen in the first 3 months. Here's what's going to happen in the next 3 months by experience and hearing what you're talking about. You want your LDL to look better? Okay, eat carbs over the weekend and let's see what it looks like. It's going to look better, but does it help you? No, but it'll look nicer.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of why, like, some people will be like, oh, I just tell my doctor I eat like plant-based, high carb, whatever, just to get him off my back. And it's like, no, tell him the truth. Like, he may not want to hear it, but at the same time, he may need to hear it and see that things can change, and it may not change from what you think would cause that. But people reaching out to their doctors and being like, I don't really care how you feel about it in terms of what you expect to happen or not. Here's what's actually happening. Here's what I'm actually doing. Like, talk to any low carb doctor and they'll say it was a patient who changed my mind, or it was me trying it on myself, or both.
Yeah, it was both
And,
for me.
like,
But,
just
you know,
people
also, yeah.
reaching out to their doctor and being like, it does not have to be this way. You do not have to hate your job. Like, it can be better. And I'm looking forward to a time when more and more doctors start getting that message of like, you can be important to people and change lives and save lives like you wanted to when you spent a ton of money getting a degree on this.
Well, and that's part of the problem. They have a ton of money they owe. You can't step out the norm. If you do, you get in trouble, right? Yeah, if you're working for a big organization, if you say anything outside that, you're in trouble. They got 50 patients to see that day, and they're like, look, there's one patient I can't spend my time talking to them about low carb stuff because it's a fad, it's going to go away, so I'm not learning any of this stuff. But the craziest part is I hear, like, when I was at low carb, like all the low carb meetings, I always have people come to me and say, you know, I lost 58 pounds, I came off all my meds, my blood pressure's better, my labs are great. And then my doctor looks at me like and says, so what are you doing? And they tell him, they say, oh no, that's terrible, you can't do that. It's like, but I'm healthier. You can't do that, it's bad. But why is it bad? I don't know. It just is.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
that's what someone told me.
Okay, well, let's keep an eye on it and we'll keep checking in, and maybe you're right. So let's keep an even closer eye on it and just keep giving them the information. And sometimes people are like that too. Like, people ask me, oh, how did you lose all the weight? No, I would never do that. That's too unhealthy. It's like, okay, but
Yeah.
I'm still healthy.
It's still,
Maybe
I'm
you're
still
right.
alive.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a couple things that are going to bug me if I don't ask you. One, when you're in grade school and high school, were you like a straight A study person, or the depression and you didn't really care and you just tried to get by until you got your passion? What happened to you?
I don't really remember much before high school. I don't know if that's like a depression void thing. It's just a bunch of black, basically.
Yeah.
But in terms of high school, it was all over the place. Like you said, there was a lot of depression aspect to it. At one point, I had like a 50% in a math class, and mom came in and was like, no, you can
got
do
to start
better than
studying.
that. Yeah. So I actually went back through and studied everything from the beginning to bring it up to like a 70 or 80 or something like that. I hated chemistry class. It was really boring. But
So
I
you're
think
like an
that's
ADD kid. If you loved it, you would like do well in it. But if you didn't like it, you're like, I don't care about this. I'm not going to study this. I'm never
and
using this.
now I find chemistry super interesting, and I think it's mostly just in how it's taught. I tend to teach myself a lot of things or talk to people who've also learned it, so I can ask the questions that matter to me. But if it's all like formulas and whatever with no context, just like, I'm checking out, I don't care. I actually did really well in English class, and what's interesting is my high school English teacher told me I was going to write a book one day, and when I did, she wanted to read it. She's like, okay, and I was like, oh, yeah, maybe she wasn't far off.
Wow. Do you have any book plans?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
All right. If you were to write a book, would it be a science book or would it be something different?
I actually weirdly, so I would probably do both, because I have a bunch of stuff that I want to write about, and on the science thing, I would probably write like 4 different books. But actually also when I was in high school, I had been planning to write this fantasy trilogy that I started work on.
That's what I figured you'd be into that.
Yeah. And every now and again, I'll think about it, be like, oh yeah, maybe I should get back to that at some point. And I've written like some short stories and stuff that have never been put anywhere. But yeah, I probably will write a book of some sort or several sorts at some point.
That's awesome. And having varied stuff, you go, oh, I'll work on the science fiction for a while, then I'll work over here, and to have that brain that is so inquisitive and creative, the
Yeah,
creativity.
that's the thing that actually got me to thinking about the fantasy series again, because I had reached a point where I wasn't sure like what the main theme was or where I wanted to go with it. But now, like taking a break on it and focusing on all the science stuff, it's like, I could do that. I could integrate that. So that's what made me think about it again, is just more life experience and information experience, I guess. And that's kind of what fantasy is in a way. It's just sci-fi extended out to the point where you can't fully explain it in the universe yet.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to be okay with not having all the answers, right? That's one thing
That's
that
the
you
life
realize.
lesson for today.
Like, hopefully that will make me tomorrow. We'll think about that one, but let's stick on
Mhm.
that. But it's hard because my mind's like that too. It's like, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole. Oh, let's go over here. And you start branching off into all these routes that are going all these different places. Like, okay, let me get back to what was I looking for at the beginning, right? Because
Yep, that's every single presentation I have ever done. Like, oh wait, I was supposed to be like writing about this thing, and now I have 15 different tabs open.
man, it's just
Well,
great. It's great that you're going out and you're stepping out of your comfort zone. You're doing these things, and that's very commendable, right? Some people, it's like very hard. For me, it's like I kind of enjoy that stuff, just yapping about stuff. But there's some amount of stress and the preparation that goes into it, and all the time and research and looking at stuff. It is time consuming. The people don't just go up there and give a talk without really thinking about it. And someone like you who's very cerebral, you can overthink stuff and say, okay, well, what about once if someone counteracts this argument or whatever? But I think that's part of the fun of it. That's how we all learn, defending what we're saying and say, okay, maybe it is crazy. Maybe we have to look at a different avenue.
yeah, and the thing with presentations is they're very much like research projects for me, where it's like as I'm working on a slide, I'm rereading through my citations, I'm making sure I have citations on it, and if I don't have one, I'll say it like, okay, this is speculation, but whatever. There's a point working on this most recent presentation where I went off on a 3-hour tangent, like deep in PubMed. Like, I've seen this said multiple times in different papers and no one cites it. Like, where is it? Where are they getting this from? And it's just because like I don't want to say something unless I know for sure it's actually supported. And I'm sure I've slipped up in some cases. And if anyone wants to point it out, feel free, let me know. But it's helpful for me because it's making me really focus on a specific topic and make sure I'm kind of actually understanding what has been said. Because sometimes you read a paper and it's like, oh, okay, I get it. And then I'll reread it for a presentation or an article or whatever. It's like, that is not what that said. So it's definitely helpful. And yeah, it's an intense process because I want to be very careful about what I'm saying and all that type of stuff, but it's for the good. And the other thing,
go ahead.
yeah, I do get anxious about presentations still and very perfectionist, but on the other hand, it's like no one else is going to make the presentation I want, so I have to do it.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that's stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit. And it's funny because for me, doing it on Zoom, recording it, and then it's with no audience is really challenging because I was reading and they were talking. I think it was Bob Newhart they were talking about, but they said he had to give this presentation, but he couldn't be there, so he gave this presentation and he would pause for 4 seconds, he would pause for 7 seconds, he would pause for 3 seconds, and when they got the audio, the video, they said, hey, this is how come you pause? He said, you'll see. And he knew how long people, when they did it live, people would laugh for 3 seconds or laugh for 7 seconds or laugh for 4. So all that space was filled. He knew how long people would laugh based on the joke and how funny the joke was, right? So because he had done it so many times. But sometimes when you're giving a talk and you can't see facial expressions or see someone look at you funny, that you can't say, oh, I here's what I really meant to say. It's hard when it's all pre-recorded. That's really challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And it's why I like giving presentations in person, because sometimes I'll be saying part of a presentation, like you said, and someone in the audience will be like, huh? And then I have this opportunity to kind of say it in a different way. And then I'll see, oh, okay. But you don't get that in the recorded version. And so, yeah, I agree. The recorded versions are definitely difficult for me. Like, I don't have the audience reaction and it feels a little bit more awkward, but I don't know. Part of it is just getting the information out there, and I can always give it at an in-person event later. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But all that, I mean, you're doing such great work. And so I'm excited about all this stuff you have coming up. Tell people about the symposium that's coming up.
Oh yeah. So the symposium is April 29th through May 1st. I'll be speaking on both the 30th and the 1st. The first one is about fibrosis and lipedema and lymphedema, some possible mechanisms that might be going on there, and how keto might be able to help with that. And then the second one is actually about carnivore for lipedema and some benefits to both high protein approaches and high fat approaches, kind of why it might be useful in general, and then kind of drilling down a little bit and kind of showing how you can experiment within that. And yeah, it's all about lipedema and lymphedema and lymphatic and fat disorders. And we have a ton of great speakers, including you and Amy Berger and Eric Westman and Amber O'Hearn. It's like, it's so frustrating because I can see the schedule and like the titles of the talks. It's like, I want to watch that one. I want to watch that one. I want to watch that one. And I have to wait.
I know there's so many good ones. I mean, that's what's so great is hearing everyone. And so anyone interested, I think that's a great, and especially if you have lymphedema or lipedema, most doctors don't know anything about it. So educate yourself, and maybe you can take this to your doctor and go, hey, you might want to listen to this one talk here. And so how do people sign up?
Yeah, they can go to lipedema-simplified.org. And then there's a little tab called events or symposiums or something like that. You can just go there and then go to the April 2022 one, and there's the sign up. And then on lipedemaproject.org as well, it's under events or symposiums, basically that type of thing in the menu. And then just go there and you can sign up. And yeah, we're still taking registrants, and we're just really excited for it. It's like, ooh, this one's gonna be good.
And I'm going to make you say the name of the whole symposium because it's the longest name I've ever seen. I was like trying to put it on my talk, and I was like, I can't fit this. I got to like go to 3 spaces.
I may get it wrong because I don't have the full thing memorized, but it's the Ketogenic Revolution for Lipedema and Lymphedema, April Virtual Symposium 2022, something like that.
You got it. Very good. Very good. That's a challenging one for sure. So in closing, what's life's best medicine for you? Since I'm doing this on both podcasts, what do you say? What gets you going? What do you say? This makes my life worthwhile, or something that gives you pleasure, or something that we may not know about you that brings you peace or joy or whatever?
I mean, I'll go with the obvious ones first, and then I'll go with some less obvious ones. The obvious ones are, I really want to understand things, like not just be given an answer and be like, oh, okay, but like really drill down and see all the inner workings, and maybe even find stuff that people assume works one way, but is actually something else. I always find that really cool. And like all that type of stuff. And the other is actually helping people. Like, I know I'm not a doctor, but just helping people understand some things. And it's another reason why I do presentations, because it helps me explain to others, and they can go back and rewatch it a couple times if they need to. But help give some people some hope again, because I know very much what it's like to just completely run out and be like, nothing matters, there's nothing I can do. And I don't think that's true for anyone. I think there's always something, even if we haven't found it yet. And then for the unexpected thing, my cat here, Kiva, is definitely one. She's a bit of a brat, but I love her very much.
Yeah, she's cute. She's been roaming around. I saw her all comfortable, peaceful back there. I was like, oh, that relaxed me just watching her chill.
Yeah. And then just the community and the friends that I have and my family, all just, they treat me very well. And I'm very thankful for it, and thankful that I can appreciate that now a lot more than I used to be able to.
Yeah, that's awesome. So thanks for joining me. This is awesome. I'm glad that we could get some education out there, and your symposium is really important. I think it's, a lot of people will really benefit from it, and there's a lot of good science and sense of humor, all that kind of stuff is going to be there. So, thanks for stepping out of your comfort zone and doing this. I mean, that's a lot of work. I know just giving a talk's a lot of work, but I can imagine dealing with all the speakers and getting everything organized. And we had Catherine on, she's doing some great stuff. And so, yeah, I'm excited that to be a part of it too. I'm really honored to be a part of it, because I think it's something that will keep growing over time. And it's really going to just help a lot of people. And I think the important thing is you says, give someone hope, give someone hope that things may not look great now, but we'll figure it out. We'll keep working, and we're going to figure out this problem, instead of saying, oh, we don't know, too bad, you got this thing.
Yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised by how much fun I've been having and how excited I am to work on the symposium and help put it together. And again, it's one of those things where it feels like, oh, I'm doing something that matters. That's fun.
That's it. That's it. When you're doing something that matters, everyone listening, you got a lot of wisdom on this one. Siobhan has a ton of wisdom and a lot of life experience and a lot of curiosity and scientific experience. And so, and liking varied things, right? So, that's what life's about. Just being curious and enjoying and giving other people hope and trying to help other people. So everyone, this is a gold nugget for you here. And, this is a CME for life, like continuing medical education for life of how, how do you deal? How do you, look at problems and try to think about it a different way than everyone else in the world's looking at it sometimes. So thank you for listening and thanks for your support, and be kind to yourself, be kind to others. And maybe one of you out there will solve some of our life's problems that we don't figure out.
I don't
But
doubt
Siobhan,
it.
thank you so much. Thanks for joining me on a Friday afternoon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was fun.